Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Horton, and I will be chairing the next panel. Just a little bit about me. I'm a visiting fellow at the University of Southampton. I work with Andy and Sarah and Gianni, who you've heard from today. Um, and I've worked with them on the Teaching Accessibility in the Digital Skill Set Research Project. I'm currently in Boston, and I am UX strategy and accessibility lead at Harvard University. And I'm so happy to be here today chairing this second session on finding and navigating high quality teaching resources. I spend a lot of my time doing just that, trying to find and navigate and sometimes create high quality teaching resources. And I'm so excited to learn from today's panelists. With this session, there won't be time for QA, but you can add questions into the QA and the panelists will answer them as possible. So first up, we're going to hear from Rolando Mendez. Rolando is the Director of Education at Teach Access, where he finds, navigates, and creates quality teaching resources for teaching accessibility as part of a larger Teach Access effort to close that accessibility skills gap that we've been hearing about today. And so he'll be speaking today about teaching accessibility skills, resources to get started. Welcome, Rolando.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am Rolando Mendez. I am going to share a little bit about some of the resources we have about Teach Access. Here's a list or an overview of what we will be covering in this 15 minutes. First, in case you don't know who Teach Access is, we're a US-based nonprofit organization founded in 2016, and we collaborate with educational institutions, industry, government, and disability advocacy organizations around the country. And the focus of our work is on teaching accessibility or accessibility education while supporting efforts to teach accessibly and inclusive. And we always like to lead with this. All of our resources and programs are free and do have no cost. Up on the screen, you will see pictures of all of our team. We're a small group consisting of 5 members and 2 interns who help us out with communications and other activities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the resource or framework for teaching accessibility. And this is a resource that it was created a couple of years ago by our supporters, volunteers, and partners. During the past couple of months, we've been working on improving it and making more useful for educators, especially for those who are not as familiarized with accessibility or those that are still struggling to understand how accessibility applies or can be taught in their own disciplines, especially when they're not from computer science, human computer interaction, etc. So we define accessibility skills as the ability to purposefully create, review, and procure digital products that are both in line with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and are fully usable by people with disabilities. And we always like to acknowledge that accessibility skills can look different across disciplines, functions, and roles. So probably someone who's an UX designer might employ different skills than the one that is like works in marketing or works in human resources, but accessibility skills are important for every discipline. So our framework consists of four knowledge areas, which is like the foundational knowledge or the know what knowledge is important, and specifically is addressed to all the disciplines. The dispositional knowledge, which is the know why accessibility is important, why are we doing accessibility, and then the applied knowledge or the know-how. How are we going to apply these different skills? During this refresh, we added the professional skills or attributes, which are like soft skills and durable skills that are also needed when engaging in accessibility work, like communication, teamwork, leadership, etc. And within the foundational knowledge, we have disability assistive technology and accessibility needs and accessible design. Under dispositional knowledge, we have historical, legal, and regulatory context. And within applied knowledge, we have accessible design in practice and professional accessible design in practice. Sorry. So, in terms of what the foundational knowledge, we think that educators have an opportunity to teach students and expand their understanding of disability by covering a broad range of disabilities and their impact on independence, on participation in everyday life. In terms of common assistive technologies, we also think that it's useful for students to understand assistive technology, their evolution, practical use, and their intersection with this accessibility. And we are not necessarily saying that they should become experts in using assistive technology. They should know how it works because the experts using assistive technologies are people with disabilities. And in terms of accessible design, we recommend helping students develop a strong understanding of accessibility standards and best practice for inclusive product development with a focus on those factors that enhance or impede accessibility. In terms of the know why, we think it's important that educators provide to the student historical understanding of the key frameworks that have shaped disability rights and accessibility, along with an overview of relevant regulatory requirements and standards. And in terms of the know-how, we kind of organize this section based on the software development life cycle because it's a cycle that could also be applied to other disciplines in terms of the stages. So is getting students to integrate those accessibility concepts at every stage of the product development process. Like I mentioned, using the software development cycle as a framework for guidance. And down on the screen, there's a link, and if you have access to the slide deck, there's a link to the fundamental concepts and skills and framework. And that document, what has is like different suggested topics within each of these knowledge areas, as well as optional learning objectives to help you frame or understand how you can frame the conversations around accessibility in your courses. In terms of professional skills, is providing guidance and applying. The goal of the here is providing guidance and applying these principles across various scenarios, disciplines, and contexts, while introducing accessibility as a professional practice and emphasizing skills for navigating organizational dynamics, managing change, and fostering effective practices. And this is very important because we, our Teach Access, are about everyone having some fundamental knowledge about accessibility, but we also want to spark that interest so students become also professionals in accessibility. So that area includes for those that want to become accessibility professionals, but also that need to understand how that works in the workplace, etc. So our resources, at a glance, are three main resources. Up on the screen are graphics for each announcing these resources. But from left to right, I'm sorry. The first one is the curriculum repository, which is a collection of over 350 open educational resources developed by faculty to teach students accessibility concepts and skills in different disciplines. And this includes assignments, lessons, modules, presentations, syllabi, discussions, videos, etc. Those resources are available both in Google and Microsoft document suite versions, and they can be used in a tab because they're by instructors everywhere because they are housed under license under a Creative Commons license. Then we have the accessibility skills hiring toolkit. This is more industry facing because we mentioned that we work a lot with industry, and it kind of provides some examples of descriptions and interview questions to build with your workforce internal capacity. And it kind of exemplifies what would it mean for a UX designer, for a human resource specialist to have those accessibility skills, and what are some of the interview questions that you could ask to a candidate applying for that position, and is to help organizations build that capacity internally. And then last but not least are the self-paced accessibility courses. These are about 13 online asynchronous courses, which introduce educators to different accessibility topics or accessibility topics applied to different disciplines, such as instructional technology, web development, computer software engineering, content development, graphic design, technical writing, game and interactive media. Most recently, we started expanding to other disciplines. The latest courses are on organizational communication and organizational / industrial psychology. And in terms of, we have provided, and you can access them through the presentation, but we are including examples of assessments that you could use to teach accessibility skills. And the one that we have included is a short assessment that has several questions about disability and accessibility, about 5. And that assessment could be used as a pretest to assess what your students know about accessibility, but also what knowledge about accessibility students acquire after teaching them these concepts. And the link to that resource is there on that table. We also have the example of classrooms activities. And in this instance, the professor created like a guide with different individual or group exercises to explore or apply accessibility topics. So in this specific resource, you will see active learning activities to get your students to learn more about accessibility or start applying accessibility skills into different situations. And it has like a guidance for the professor and how like it was applied and how it could be applied into their own course. We've also included an example of a lesson, and this specific lesson focuses on captioning music and special effects. And it introduces students to the topic of audiovisual accessibility. And it's one of my favorite lessons because it provides like introduction to things that students are mostly familiarized with, closed captioning, probably audio description, but also can be applied or used in different disciplines because of the way this specific lesson was built. Although it was used for a music course, it can be used in different disciplines. And then we also included an example of an assignment, and this specific assignment has different phases. And the first one is getting students to conduct user research on a specific user interface. And what they do is it has prompts to getting students to ask about how different users, including users with disabilities, interact with that user interface, and then observe them, and then ask questions about it, get their feedback, and then as part of that, use that research to provide recommendations to improve the user experience through accessibility. So getting started, we know that the audience includes faculty who are at different stages in incorporating accessibility into their own classrooms. But here are some tips that we share always with faculty to help them get started. So it could be as simple as inviting a guest speaker to share their experiences and insights. For example, one instructor from a university in Texas invited different colleagues with disabilities to talk about their experiences using inaccessible technology. You can also create a discussion prompt related to disability and accessibility. For example, an instructor had their students talk about or analyze or discuss what were the legal implications of accessibility within their own discipline and how it related to when they were developing new products. You can assign a reading or a video about disability and accessibility. We always recommend prioritizing those by disabled authors. Also organize demonstrations on assistive technology. On the curriculum repository, there are various resources for getting students to familiarize themselves with out-of-the-box accessibility solutions such as screen readers, etc. Hands-on exercises such as short video, captioning a short video, creating an accessible document or content, or evaluating a website's accessibility. And also have students research disabilities, accessibility related cases, accessible design, guidelines and best practices, or even assistive technology. So that concludes my presentation. On the screen, you will have our website, which is teachaccess.org. You can always contact us at info@teachaccess.org and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook with @teachaccess. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Orlando. That was really great. I'm a huge fan of Teach Access, and I highly recommend that exploring those free resources. I didn't know about that lesson on music and special effects. That's definitely I'm going to go check that out. So our next panelist is Danielle Montalvo. Danielle is an accessibility specialist at the World Wide Web Consortium and within the Web Accessibility Initiative. where he works on some of the most foundational and essential resources that are out there for achieving digital accessibility, as well as research for teaching about them. And so he'll be speaking today about the WAI curricula, build, compare, and select courses on web accessibility. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for your time and the University of Southampton for the invitation. Let's start without further delay presenting the curriculum on web accessibility. But first, let's focus on W3C WAI, and let's give an intro to WAI. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Second one. W3C WAI, that stands for World Wide Web Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative. We do mainly standards in the form of technical reports. You may be familiar with WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but there's other standards that we do, including accessible rich internet applications and others. We also do complementary materials for those standards, including the understanding and techniques for WCAG, and also the WCAG to ICT document, which explains how WCAG could apply to other technologies, mainly non-web documents and software. And we also provide outreach resources within which we can include the WAI curricula that we're going to present today. If we can go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
So what were the objectives of this project when we started thinking about that? It was mainly about providing guidance for either people who will develop accessibility courses or people who will need to procure accessibility courses. There's this gap that we've been commenting on through the day today from different perspectives, and it's still essential for people to have specific guidance on developing and procuring courses on web accessibility. So in that particular scenario, the curricula provides guidance mainly for those who develop their courses on what to include, what is really needed in the courses, how to teach the different accessibility topics. We'll get into those in a minute. We'll provide advice for how different topics should be considered, and then also how to assess the student's knowledge after the course completion. There's two things here. There's people who are already very familiar with accessibility who may say, well, I already know this, and that's great, but that still provides a common framework of understanding for everybody in the field. Like, this is what we think that is important and should be taught. And also from the other perspective, or orienting people who need to procure or select courses. This is guidance mainly on the course's quality. If you compare the different courses based on what's in the curricula, you can probably get an understanding of what every course strengths and weaknesses are, and how each of them addresses the topics in the curricula. And the appropriate coverage of topics is as well based basically on the ideas that we provide on teaching and ideas to assess knowledge. Something that course selectors, we hope they would appreciate. If we can go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
So what's the available curricula at the moment? We do have a role-based curricula. This is basically addressing different roles that involved in creating and developing accessible content. The curricula is structured on a modular approach. That means there's modules. The main unit of structure within the curricula are the modules, and then there's different substructures. And to start with, there's the foundation modules, which are designed for all roles, and then there is specific curricula for developers, designers, and content authors. The idea here, of course, is that the different roles are involved in the foundational modules, and then design and develop developers and content authors, they have their own specific guidance, but we try to establish a different set of competencies and contents within each of those, which I will explain in the next slide. If we can go to the next one, please.
Done.
So each of the modules contains, first of all, and most importantly, learning outcomes. We've tried to arrange this curricula around terminology and language that can be used in a variety of environments. This is, of course, academia. This is industry. This is self-teaching courses that one can create. So the idea has always been to include these learning outcomes, which are the basis really for every module. What is really what students should know or should be able to achieve after they take courses based on that particular module of the curricula. Then we do have a competencies section where we address both from the instructional and the student's perspective which of the competencies we consider essential. Like, for example, in the case of the developer modules, one of the competencies we indicate that we suggest is that developers take the foundation module, same as designers and content authors. Sometimes there's the danger that one says, okay, I'm a developer, I'm only interested in the developer parts of the accessibility field, and it's like, well, probably you should not be focused exclusively on that. You should know how people with disabilities use the web first in order to try to fix whatever is broken in your development. So that's what the competencies do. They try to provide guidance as to which modules we suggest are needed first in order for students to be successful. Then we subdivide this learning outcomes that we commented about in different topics. We call it topics to teach. And this is basically fleshing out these learning outcomes and starting to give guidance to the instructor as to how they could teach the different modules. Each of those topics to teach have their own subset of learning outcomes, but they also have ideas for teaching and assessment, which is basically for instructors how we suggest you go about teaching the module, and also how we suggest you go about assessing the module. And then at the end of every module, we have the teaching resources, which are basically other materials that we consider essential for you to be able to build your courses, and for you, instructor, mainly to be able to gain an understanding of accessibility. Again, if you're an accessibility expert and you've been doing teaching for many years, probably these resources will be familiar to you. If you're new to accessibility and you need to start building courses, we do think they're going to be helpful. Next, please.
Yep, done.
Just to finish up very briefly, the main takeaway that we were very interested in making sure it was covered is this thing, essentials for teaching accessibility. We have that in the curricula overview page. And I think this, for everybody interested in teaching accessibility, this 5 bullet points should be really like the 5 golden rules in order to approach accessibility, and I'm very glad to see that this has been extensively discussed during the seminar today, the symposium today. So involving people with disabilities, we've had discussions around that, including the why and the how. There's also been talks about how it's important for students to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and also how it's done. Covering all disabilities, that's been a wonderful, presentation on that on the second session set. Accessibility should be also approached holistically. It's part of a whole. It shouldn't go in isolation. There's other disciplines that intersect with accessibility, and we need to clearly explain where and how. And of course, the last but not least, make it accessible. Chances are you're going to have people with disabilities who also want to learn about accessibility themselves. Next, please. Feedback, just very quickly, if you go to w3.org /way/curricula, we're going to put all of this in the chat. There's links at the bottom of the page for you to provide feedback if you want to open an issue or if you want to write an email. You're more than welcome to do so. Next one, please. So there's we said this is mainly for course developing, and an example of this is a course that WAI has developed together with UNESCO. This is based on the foundation module. So the link is again here. It's w3.org/way/courses/foundations-course. Course, sorry. So if you want to take a look, that would be very much appreciated. Next, please. And just to close this, thank you very much. This is the overview page of WAI, w3.org/WAI. You can find more of our work in that particular page. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciated that reminder about the objectives of the resources and having that helping select and procure courses. I kind of didn't realize that, and I really love the 5 golden rules. So thanks for that presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. And so last but not least, we'll hear from Andy Coverdale. Andy is Research Fellow in Education at the Center for Inclusive Research at the University of Southampton and is a colleague on the Teaching Accessibility Research Project. And I have learned so much working alongside Andy, and I'm sure you will too. He'll be sharing a typological approach to pedagogy for teaching digital accessibility.
Thank you, Sarah. Hopefully you can see the slides okay. Yeah, it's great to see you, Sarah. Thanks very much. And thanks to Rolando and Danielle for 2 great presentations. I have to say they're quite a tough act to follow, mainly because what I'm presenting is very early stage in development, so very much an upcoming resource, but one that we're happy to share at this stage and invite feedback on. So, for those of you who were with us earlier, you will have seen Sarah present an overview of our project, our Teaching Accessibility Research Project, and then I presented on some of our approaches to research. Really, just to recap for anyone who missed those, we conducted thematic analysis of extensive data collected from a wide range of sources from expert panels, focus groups, and case studies. And so one of the main things moving forward with the project is we want to develop an online tool or resource for educators teaching and training accessibility. And I think I want to stress, we're very conscious as educational researchers, we're not computer scientists. How can we best develop a resource that draws on our expertise, but also sort of complements other resources out there, such as those that have been presented today by Rolando and Danielle. And primarily, we see our resource as a practical and reflective tool, so very much promoting the accessibility teacher as a reflective practitioner, but one that also really draws on our rich data. So we are basing the resource on a typological structure. Now, I won't say a great deal here. I think the keywords are relational and non-hierarchical, so keep those in mind. But I will say we do draw on significant previous research by Sarah here, working with our colleague, Professor Melanie Nind, who has been mentioned a few times today, and they applied typologies to pedagogy in that previous research. So our typology comprises 4 levels. So we have approaches which reflect values, theories and models, aspirations, beliefs, very much relating to teacher identities. We have strategies which reflect plans for implementing approaches. Think perhaps curricular design a bit here. These are goal-directed towards motivating and engaging learners, for example, facilitating reflection. We see tactics at a more procedural level, so reflecting, the actions required to follow through strategies. And these can be quite responsive to sort of feedback and the dynamic of the learning environment. And then tasks reflect the activities that teachers and learners actually do. So what does it look like? I have to say, implementing our research data from a thematic to a typological structure has been pretty tough, and it's required a lot of ongoing reviewing to consider sort of appropriate scale and usability. And we are drawing on data visualization to support this analytical work, but we also recognize, that the potential for it to help navigate the final results. So what we have here is a prototype Sankey diagram of just a small section of our data and our typology, mainly focused on the aspects of disability, what we refer to, I think Sarah mentioned this earlier, as teaching with, through and about disability. Now, of course, we appreciate any visual representation such as this is not accessible to everyone. So we are looking to include corresponding and additional sort of navigational tools, such as tabs for screen reader users in our final resource. But what we have here is basically multiple interconnected approaches, strategies, tactics, and tasks. And we sort of call these components. So as a non-hierarchical structure, you can sort of think of each of these as potential entry points through which somebody might start and then start to explore through related components. So as an example here, we've got highlighted a tactic engaging different disabilities, which links to tasks using video and learner-led research. It also links to a strategy, challenging stereotypes, which links to various approaches to engaging disability. But engaging different disabilities also links to strategies on projects, with links to a whole bunch of other approaches, authentic and student-centered learning, etc. So hopefully you can see how this will very soon expand and multiply into quite complex but interesting ways. And in our final resource, when we develop it, each of these components will be represented by a web page of text that will draw heavily on our data, but also literature around the teaching of accessibility and more broadly sort of that educational literature and learning theories. And we'll have links to other theories and a whole bunch of stuff in there as well. Thinking back to our original sort of thematic analysis, we do see distinct cultures or strands connecting these components that we might identify as sort of key pathways or areas to explore. And there's just a few examples here, such as putting disability first, managing complexity, making accessibility relatable, and getting close to practice. Now, we've been I am wrapping up soon. I'm aware of the time. I don't want to keep Sarah and Tom waiting, but we have been running a series of workshops and meetings with educators in the accessibility field, particularly those with experience of resource development, but also outside the field, so people who have developed similar typology work, very much tapping into expertise here at this education school and those involved with teacher training. And they've given us some really useful responses and feedback. I will just click through those and finish with, because this is the result of those discussions really, this is our proposed features then for our resource. So obviously we have the typology, or the wayfinder as we call it ourselves, you know, in terms of that ways to navigate through these different components. But we're also looking at starting places to prompt and provide guidance, teaching stories, which will be short narratives taken directly from our data, but that relates to components or strands in our wayfinder. And also a community function, so people who use the resource can sort of share expertise and discuss ideas prompted by their use. So really, it's a case of watch this space. We will be looking to launch this in the near future. But for now, if you have any feedback, thoughts, or ideas, please do get in touch with us, with Sarah or I. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time, and back to you, Sarah.